Welcome to Evolve, Reinventing Leadership, Building Freedom Cultures, with thought leader and award-winning author Yvette Bethel. This podcast provides you with insights and ideas you can use to reinvent your culture through trust and the principles of interconnectivity, flow, and balance. At a time when the world is rewriting the rules of work, traditional leadership practices are not enough. It's time to perceive persistent challenges through a new lens. It's time to evolve.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to Evolve. This is your host, Yvette Bethel. This episode is number 4 in the Future of Leadership series. We have today with us Edwin Clamp, and together we will be discussing power as an organizational ecosystem variable. So, Edwin, introduce yourself.
Yes, so my name is Edwin Clamp, and I can be reached at edwinclamp.com. Edwin at edwinclamp.com. Just email me if you want to reach out.
Power is one of my favorite topics for ecosystem discussions because it's something that has such a profound impact on everything. Everything that's done has a power dynamic, whether it's power with or power over, and uh, and a lot of times people are not aware. They're not aware when it's power with because it's in balance. You know, the power is with you now because it should be. It's with me now, and it goes back and forth, and it's kind of, friendly um, and moving. It's dynamic. And then there's power over, uh, and that's a kind of both are extrinsic and both move and both are a lot more fleeting than intrinsic power. Um, I think the one that we've been trained to value the most is extrinsic power, which is outside of ourselves. And so people, kind of grasp for more power. They have ambition and they're egocentric with that. And they, kind of want to move up the power ladder. And the thing about that kind of power is it's really fragile because someone can grab it. It's not real. It's kind of a construct. And certainly it can be unhealthy depending on the core values that are working in beneath the surface with the culture. So that's just like an introductory kind of statement. Edwin, it's over to you.
Yeah, so I think this topic of what we would call here power can be approached many different ways, and there's many ways of we've talked about lenses, but there are many lenses that we look at things. I think one of our early discussions that we were talking about politics, and so that's a particular lens on power. The polis, of course, meaning the people, so the study of how people behave in socially. Um, that is a lens that I'm not very good at. I think we talked about that because I'm just not a very political person. So I want to look at it. I mean, there's a whole discussion there. I'm probably not the person for that, but what I do want to talk about is how I see power conceptually. Um, and I think some of the things that we've talked about previously in our podcasts, the ecosystem, things like that, set us up to understand power. So if we take this idea of the politics, meaning people, we can think about the body and how the body regulates itself. And we've talked a lot about homeostasis and how it likes to find a steady state, but in nature, that steady state is a fluctuating state, right? So heartbeat, hormone levels, everything fluctuates. And when I look at power, I'm very much thinking of that metaphor because you're having movement in a system, and that movement is coming from somewhere. So we learn in physics that an object at rest tends to stay at rest unless moved on by a force. So you have this system that is changing directions all the time. So there are forces in play, right? And we think about what are those forces. And I think within that system, what we're really seeing, the cause of the movement is the tension in the system, that there are these two opposing forces in a system that kind of push and pull on each other. So we see this in the organization, the workers versus the management. There's many different ways you'll see this kind of tension going back and forth. That's a natural system. And I think it's a healthy system. We've talked about that, how being receptive to employee feedback can improve the performance of management, things like that. So recognizing that dynamic in healthy systems, contrasting that to what we build as systems. We build rigid systems. We tend not to build very flexible systems because the primary um, the primary outcome you're looking for when you're building flexible systems is resilience, not productivity, right? So we tend to build very rigid systems because we want to maintain the system at a particular point of optimal productivity. But
Hmm.
what we're doing there is we're constraining those natural movements in that system. And that tension, for anyone who's engineering minded, is going to show up in places in the system.
Hmm.
So, to kind of give a metaphor, I remember talking to somebody about machinery, like what you'd find in a factory, and like different, like German machinery is very good, and maybe a foreign machinery, Chinese machinery is not so good. One of the things that they said that makes German machinery very, very good is it's not the machine, it's the context in which they build it. So the framework in which they put the machine, because it becomes very rigid. They over-engineer the framework, so it's very rigid. So as that machine is working and working and working day in and day out, it can absorb the stresses of that mechanism, as it were. Uh, I think what I was hearing is on the cheap machines, the machine itself is good, but the framework is bad, and it ends up over time getting distorted and twisted, and then the machine breaks. I think what I'm saying there is when we build systems to be very productive, they also have to be very rigid. And that's where we kind of come into the conflict with human nature and the organic system that human collections create. So we got
Yeah.
the need to be dynamic being constrained in a rigid system, and it's those points of stress that we start to observe.
And those rigid systems, they tend to rely more heavily on power over dynamics
Yes,
because that's how they hold it in the state that
yes,
it falls within. So I guess the command and control model is more prevalent in those systems. But in the beginning, you mentioned, you're not very good at politics, but I would beg to differ. I would say most people are not great. Well, not most people. A lot of people are not interested in toxic politics, but you have politics and the uses of power that are actually healthy when
hmm
it is shared, when it is moving, when it does allow flexibility, when the power,
yes.
shifts as it should, and there's as I said earlier, there's no ego kind of infiltrating the
Right.
situation, creating tensions.
Yeah, and I think what you bring up there is we have this negative connotation with the word politics, which really in its strictest definition is a neutral word, right?
Hmm.
We have this negative connotation because often in these systems that we create, the bigger the system, the more the politics that are involved. When we think about the federal government, just intense politics within these agencies and stuff. So the bigger the system, the more rigid, the more toxic. That's, I think, something
Yeah,
really.
and I find that I'm finding that in order for systems to become more flexible, they're downsizing and separating out and networking and giving the I guess the let's say geographies their own authorities. Like they're decentralizing in
Mhm.
order for the power to be used in healthy ways, because otherwise it's going to continue to be power over because you have somebody. I worked in an organization where there were 70,000 employees. The head office was in one country. We were in like 130 odd countries.
Mm-hmm.
And the head office was making decisions for everyone with, geographic differences, cultural differences. It just didn't work. It couldn't
Hmm.
work. Uh, it was it was impossible. You try to harmonize, but it wasn't quite possible because of it wasn't taking into consideration jurisdictional differences. It
Right,
couldn't. It
right,
was impossible to do that.
right. So that I think you see this paradox starting to emerge. You get these systems, these large systems developing, and I think it's fair to say that in our society we do need large systems. There are certain things that have to be large in order to work, like train systems, for example. And I think that lines up with nature. There are large animals in nature, just not a lot of them. But I think as we start to look at smaller systems or autonomous systems, we get to see, in a sense, a more efficient way of doing things. Because what happens in the very big systems is through their uh, kind of the command control model, they're making really bad decisions. I mean, they
Yeah.
may seem good in the leadership context in the head office, but when they're rolled out to these, all the different countries, they're terrible decisions, and it becomes very detrimental to the mission of the organization.
I'm not convinced that large is something that we can't live without. I used to believe that. I
Right.
don't know that I believe that anymore. I think
Yes.
that's what we've been conditioned to believe.
Well,
But
yeah, I think when I was saying that, it was almost saying, assuming that we continue to live in a society much like ours. I mean, I
yeah,
think there's a lot of things that we assume we need that are products of large systems that maybe we don't need. That's almost a whole other level of philosophy there.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I think oh, go ahead.
No, so I think, when we're talking about this, what I'm really interested in is when you think about the system in this kind of this sine wave metaphor, and you've got these two forces pulling and pushing the movement in the system back and forth, however it oscillates.
Could you
It's
can you explain that in another way so that people who can this is an audio.
Oh yes, I'm
Yeah.
I'm using a lot of hand
Yeah,
motion.
yeah, yeah.
Yes, oh that makes sense. Um, so the the qu- the metaphor that I often use to examine things is kind of a wave. So, you can think of a wave on the surface of the water, kind of up and down. And conceptually, the up and down movement is a tension between two forces, basically. Um, that's holding that kind of that oscillating point within the same range and the same rhythm. That there's a tension. Uh, for example, with the wave, you've got gravity pulling the water down, and you've got wind whipping the water. So these two forces are in tension, and there's different ways we could describe it. But then the real question becomes for me, what are the tensions at play in moving the system? Are you talking about customer? Are we taking the customer into the account, the suppliers? Are we listening to the employees? And I,
Uh,
I think in the end, what we need to do is have systems that are responsive to the change in tension between the different stakeholders.
I
And I think one of the keys there is not trying to control the stakeholders. I see that a lot, but like for example, in the wind industry, one of your environmentalists are a big stakeholder, but there's a lot of effort to try to basically manage them and contain them, control them, instead of actually just be responsive to them. And there is evidence to show that being responsive is much more productive.
you kind of use a partial example. I'd like to kind of take that through from start to finish.
Sure.
with an example. And I guess one could be employee morale,
Mm,
where the morale impacts resilience and creativity and a lot of things within an organization. And there are a lot of forces. You talked about those forces that impact morale. It could be, leadership style. It could be, too many controls. It could be some external factor
right.
that shifts everything. So take it from there.
Yes. So, I mean, that's a great example. There is a lot, like, yeah, employee morale. There's a lot of factors that contribute to that, but also those factors are changing. I mean,
That's right.
an issue may come up because it's news or a contemporary topic that wasn't there 2 years ago, and it becomes a major issue. And things that used to be like big deals disappear. So not only is it a dynamic environment, but the mix is changing all the time. And I
Hmm.
think when you're talking about morale, it's really about how I relate to the organization, how I relate to the other people in the organization. It's a relationship.
Hmm.
So just like in a marriage or a relationship, you continually have to work to show up and be present for that other person in your relationship and meet them where they are every day, no matter what's going on in their lives. I think something like dealing with employee morale is really the same kind of approach. You're showing up with kind of this open curiosity, willingness to listen, not tell, listen and consider and be receptive to what you're hearing. And in doing that, what you're able to do is to allow those natural shifts in forces to work themselves out in healthy ways versus trying to hold a particular point rigidly until the force builds up and builds up and builds up and then you have a rupture. Okay. I
So
think that's the point there.
so now let's insert power in that example. You talked about how we're showing up in relationships.
Right.
I think that's where the power conversation can develop from,
Right.
because we show up with how we use power. Are we using power um, to kind of subdue, influence, or are we sharing the power? Like, how are we
Yes.
showing up with the power? And how is that? How does
Right.
how we show up impact the whole
Right.
the fluidity of the relationship and its outcomes?
Well, so even though we're talking about morale in an organization, this metaphor of the marriage or the relationship comes back. And as you know, power dynamics in relationships are a big thing. And there's a lot
Exactly.
of psychology about how power uh is um I don't know what the word is, taken or used or exerted in very, very subtle ways. So it becomes this very subtle thing that really takes very high emotional intelligence, but not only that, the willingness to do the work,
Yeah.
to listen for those little shifts in people's um, communications, whether it's verbal, nonverbal, and this is what you have to do in a relationship, and you have to be willing, in a sense in leadership or in a relationship, you have to be willing to either cede power to your partner, which is difficult when you have all the power because it's a much safer place to be in control, or at least it feels that way, right? So
Yeah.
you either have to be willing to cede power or alternatively have to be willing to take power. People who are disenfranchised or disempowered, there's an equal obligation for them to step up and also be present in the relationship or also be present in the organization. But then you start to run into pathologies of power. If somebody steps up, are they going to be punished? And that's where the leadership, I think, has to do the hard work when somebody says something uncomfortable or they start to see something that was not, it's against what they were planning or thinking, being humble enough to take that feedback and act on it.
I think there's a third option. You can cede power, you can take power, you can share power.
Yes,
And that's
absolutely.
just giving and taking in a more fluid way. Because sometimes when people give power, they just give, and that's
Yes, right.
they're not accessing it. Uh,
Yes,
I don't, to be honest, I don't believe that we can truly give our power away. I think we can only opt not to use our power because I think the true power that we have is intrinsic.
right.
And that was for each one of us, it's built on something that's very purposeful that no one else can access. You can only decide not to tap into it. Uh, and allow people to use extrinsic power to kind of
Right,
I guess overplay or what's a good word? Subjugate,
right,
really. But that's a choice. And when people figure out what they have within, they can make a different choice. But a lot of people don't figure it out. They believe that what's out, they've been conditioned to believe that what's outside of them is better. And that if they choose not to use their intrinsic power, they somehow gave something away, which I don't think that's correct. I think
right. Hmm.
that's impossible.
Yeah, so the willingness to use what you have. And I think what you said there is sharing power obviously is kind of the coming together of those two opposite movements, the two tensions, and what we want to do is to share power in a way that is mutually beneficial for us and in an organization. Hopefully that aligns with your organizational goals. Like we're going to share power and be more profitable, or we're going to share power and, you know, have higher employee satisfaction, whatever.
I think we share power much more than we realize. It's a
Yes.
natural, organic kind of experience. And because it's operating that way, we don't sense it. We are not
Mm.
aware that we're actually using power. Because you have some people who always say, well, power's dirty and I don't do that. And, they have
Right.
these negative biases toward it. But in actuality, they are using it
Right.
in healthy ways, but it's just that we're not attuned to to that. We haven't been we haven't learned how to attune to that or value that.
Right. Well, I think it's this deeper work that I think we're being called to do, particularly in leadership, because you set the example. Like, and I think what we're talking about here, power, has a direct correlation to what we talked about previously, which is trust. You know, when you engender trust in your colleagues, that sharing of power becomes much more organic and available. When you're engendering distrust, it becomes a risk and people pull back. They're gonna approach that in a way that mitigates the risk.
I think trust is a diffuser of power.
Mm,
It automatically shares it because
yes.
you go back and forth in a natural kind of rhythm.
Mm,
And it diffuses it because nobody needs to have power over the situation or another person. It
right.
just naturally goes back and forth, back and forth.
Yeah.
And each relationship has a different rhythm, has a different cadence.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, particularly as you're saying that, the back and forth, I mean, again, I go back to the interpersonal relationship, like you're with your partner. A really healthy relationship, you find this rhythm of trust and giving and taking. Because not every decision is an existential decision that you need to win. There's
Right.
just a lot of things, and in a sense, you become more at ease. You move away from the point to the process. Like what matters more now is not the decision that was made. It's that we're working together well. So we're shifting our focus from the product to the process.
There aren't many tools that actually na or naturally diffuse power the way trust and for families it's love.
Mhm.
Uh, there aren't many tools that diffuse power that way, naturally, organically, without that extra effort, that okay, I need to share it and give this person authorities and that type of thing. It just happens.
Mhm.
So, but there are ways to superficially break the power down as well, like I said, through authorities or changing policies or reporting lines and things like that.
Mhm. Yeah, all the mechanisms. Mm. Yeah, so I think, when I step back, I just see that, again, we're going really deep into the philosophy here, but our current way that we organize systems is very what we call the Cartesian Newtonian. It's based on science and really the philosophical objective of that way of thinking is control. It's control. We want to control the systems, we want to control the crops, we want to control the machines, the products that, the parameters. It's all about control. So we've engineered this whole thing. I think what we need to realize are people are not these engineered systems that can be controlled well. We're an organic dynamic system. So anytime we do something one place, it's going to be reverberating in another place, and it becomes too complex to control. And so this control mindset does work in terms of some things that we do as a society, but it does not work well for society. There needs to be these more flexible structures and flexible mechanisms. And that's, if you were engineering a product that is working in a dynamic environment like a boat or an airplane, you're not engineering for rigidity, you're engineering for flexibility. And I think that is something that really needs to come to the forefront in terms of the power dynamics is building in more flexible systems so that as these power imbalances start to appear, the system itself has the room to adjust. It's not, in a sense, the system isn't becoming its own worst enemy in this case. It's engineered in a way that naturally flexes and allows these shifts that will happen over time. I think you may have gone on mute.
Oh, yeah. You're taking it back to the beginning with rigidity versus flexibility. And I think in the end, for power to, I guess, work in healthy ways, you need more flexibility. I think that's essentially what you're saying. And I tend to lean toward that. I think the rigidity in command and control models is because a lot of things is centralized.
Mhm.
We talked about that or overly concentrated in one place. And I think that it's very easy to fall back into habits when you're moving from one type of use of power to the other.
Mhm.
It's very easy to slip back into command and control patterns because those are familiar.
Yeah.
Although they're uncomfortable, they're also comfortable. Because that's what's known, and everything else is not known in some organizations. So,
Right.
go ahead.
Well, I mean, we're socialized into this. So, when you go get your MBA, you're taught how to control an organization, how to run it. There are, well, there may be, but I've never come across a class on EQ in an MBA school. It's a different way of thinking. Now, maybe things are progressing, but in a sense, when I think about leadership, probably the most important thing is the ability of the leader to interface with their different constituencies and pick up on that signaling and
Mhm.
adjust the course of their ship. and not be, I mean, sitting there and looking at your performance ratios and making decisions based on numbers. I mean, it's got its place, but when you're dealing with organizational challenges, you need to have that sensitivity. I mean, that's why as human beings we have senses, because we need that continuous feedback to stay in a good place in relationship to our context.
Mhm. I'd like to talk a little bit about informal power, because we have formal power structures that I think we've talked quite a bit about. But a lot of times, some leaders pay attention to the informal power structures, some don't, to their detriment. But I'd love to add that to this conversation because informal power structures within ecosystems are important to understand what they are and how they work and why they exist, because they do have a point or a goal.
Yes. So I think this is, the informal power structures is evidence that we as humans do create organically our systems. So it becomes a system within a system that is not created formally. It just occurs naturally. And it can be healthy and it can be unhealthy. There can definitely be unhealthy formal power structures. But I think what I would reflect on is it goes back, I would go back to Edgar Schein's work on organizational psychology, that a lot of organizational behavior is intrinsically trying to address the question is, am I safe? Is this a secure position for me? And people are going to make choices in who they're associating with kind of on that. Is going to the office water cooler and getting the latest gossip, is that actually like a survival mechanism that you're keeping your ear to the ground and knowing what's going on? It can be pathological, but it's in a sense it the the pathologies that can develop in a informal power structure are in a sense a proxy for a healthy power structure's trust. And I think you can see that too. Informal power structures can organize around trust, that people will put the person who's most trustworthy in a central position and give
Yeah.
them give them power.
An example of that would be maybe cliques.
Yes.
Cliques form for various reasons. One reason that they form is, I guess, people lamenting their, bad treatment by a certain manager or by the company, but they
Yes.
have something in common that they're coming together about, and it acts as, in that case, because cliques, like I said, have different purposes. But in a case like that, it operates like a valve so that people can complain, complain, complain. And there might be somebody, as you say, that's central, that's, everyone talks to or gives advice or makes it worse. It depends
Right.
on their intent and how they use their power. Uh, to kind of shift away from the formal power to them. There's so many dynamics that can happen within cliques. They can work with the organization or against it.
Right, right. I mean, what you're just describing, I'm sitting here thinking, well, that sounds like trauma bonding. When people are getting together and they're talking about something detrimental that happened, maybe a boss.
Absolutely. But sometimes cliques form where people go out and party and have a great time. It
Yeah,
doesn't have to be about trauma. It
it
just
does
may,
not. It can
yeah,
be
it can be
many different forms of
socializing.
that.
I just used that as one of the examples.
Right, right. But I think in the end, one of those core needs is to feel safe. Even in a trauma bonding response, what we're really doing there is looking for solace and safety. Or if it's a positive thing, like people go out and socialize, being a part of the herd, being included is a safer place to be.
Yeah,
So a lot of it comes back to that, and
ba
I,
basic needs.
Yeah,
Maslow.
basically, right. Um, so I think it asks the question, do people in your organization, honestly feel safe? Are they um is there any fear that they're harboring? Are there these unhealthy dynamics that are making, maybe it's a department or a particular person that's, you know, are they getting to belong? Are they choosing to belong? Is it more uncomfortable for them to belong than to not belong? There are these, it's very like basic questions, but I think it comes down to, that basic disposition. Am I feeling good where I'm at? Do I need to make a move to get to a more stable place in my psyche?
But those are key questions that dictate how power is going to be used. Because
Right.
they partially dictate it, not fully, because some of it has to do with intent. Uh, but if people feel threatened, they're gonna, put the walls up. And if people on the other side that design the ecosystem actually intend to exert power over other people, it plays well together. I'm exerting my power, and I'm like, oh gosh, I need to protect myself from being gobbled up. So it works together to kind of get that outcome of productivity that you talked about
Yes.
several times in this conversation. So it just takes you back to that. But if the informal power has I guess, an intent of support and an intent behind it of, collaboration. And people, when they come together, they're not necessarily needing safety or to be covered up by this umbrella and hidden. They're coming together because they're connected. You talked about belonging earlier. They feel connected, they feel like they belong. And so that brings them together naturally and organically. And so they start sharing power naturally and organically. It's not this, oh, I have to oppress you kind of thing.
Right. And I think when I think about Maslow, for example, his hierarchy of needs, I mean it's it correlates to some other theoretical models that I learned about in education. But basically, the more that we're attentive to those foundational layers of people's existence, we free them from, do I have a place to sleep tonight? Am I going to eat today? We free them from the more fundamental point, like duties of survival, and we elevate them to being able to move into higher order functions like collaboration and creativity and negotiation. And those are all very higher order functions. Listening is a higher order function. So the more that we can address some of those, what seem to be very inconsequential, not my problem things, the more we empower people to be present for what we really need them to do.
Yeah. I think in all of this, I think what would you like for people to remember about, I think let's go back to uh, the title of this show, which is power as an organizational ecosystem variable. Like in kind of leaving it with people, what do we want to leave with them? Because it is a variable, even though in some cases the arrangement might be static, there are
Right.
variables.
Yeah, so I think it's the variables that we need to be considering. And like for example, we talk about an ecosystem and we can say, okay, here's a boreal ecosystem. But there's not just one thing that's a boreal ecosystem. You can go here and it's going to be a completely different one than here, or rainforest. Like not all the rainforests, like this little patch of rainforest can be drastically different than this one. So we have to develop that sensitivity to the variables in our context so that we don't need to learn about ecosystems we need to learn about our ecosystem, and we need to be, in a sense, responsive to our context specifically. And so that really, I think, investing in improving your emotional intelligence, investing in relationships that are bi-directional, and really investing in listening and building trust. I think that is the foundation of the journey to having a healthy power dynamic.
I couldn't have said it better. So, with that, that's a great closing. With that, I'd like to thank you, Edwin, for this fourth episode in our Future of Leadership series. And it's always great to have you shed light on ecosystems and in this conversation about leadership. Before we go, can you tell people once again how to connect with you?
Yeah, so my name's Edwin Clamp. Easiest way is just to look me up online. I'm easy to find, or you can email me at edwin@edwinclamp.com. Super easy to find me. Hit me up.
Perfect. So this has been Yvette Bethel and Edwin Clamp, and we'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us at Evolve, Reinventing Leadership, Building Freedom Cultures.
Thank you for listening to Evolve, Reinventing Leadership, Building Freedom Cultures. Learn more about our proprietary trust, leadership, and culture courses and certifications at the IFB Academy. You can check them out at organizationalsoul.learnworlds.com.